Jeff York, it's been a few weeks since we talked about The Bride, a movie that neither of us particularly cared for. But now we're going to be talking about a film featuring a bride that I think kind of knocked both of our socks off. Yes, I'm talking about Ready or Not 2, Here I Come, a sequel to a 2019 film that I did not really care for at all. But, and folks, sit down. You're not going to believe this. Ready or Not 2, I know it's early, is on my list of best films of 2026. You might turn this off at the very mention of that, but I invite you to stay tuned to find out why. And joining me, of course, is Jeff York of the Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists. Thank you very much, sir. How you doing?
Really good. Glad to be here and glad to talk about this film.
All right. Tell me about you. You enjoyed the first Ready or Not quite a bit, as I recall. I have very little memory of it, except for the fact that I didn't care for it. And I was wondering if you could kind of bring us up to speed of what is Ready or Not, and then we'll kind of talk about the second film. But what is the first movie, and what did you like about it?
Well, there are a lot of similar qualities to both. I would argue that in some respects, maybe the first one was concentrated a little bit more, which maybe makes it not as broad as fun as the second is. But suffice it to say, the story concerns a young bride who's worldly, but also a little bit naive, named Grace, who's fallen in love. And she's going to meet her husband's rich parents, the in-laws, in their mansion and sort of have the big celebration and party. And when she gets there, she finds out that these very well-off but eccentric in-laws have a tradition of playing games. And when she has to choose from amongst all these different kind of games that the family's company makes, she ends up choosing hide and seek, which is kind of a gasper because that's the one game that is sort of associated with danger, where they now have to hunt the person who draws that, which in this case is the bride, and kill her before the sun comes up. And if they do not kill her, then somehow they are going to lose their lives. We don't know quite exactly what that means, but there's trouble for the family that doesn't sort of complete this ritual. It's all about sort of rituals, you know, and it's sort of making a little bit of fun of weddings and wedding nights and, you know, honeymoon suites and what do you swear to Richard before and until death do us part. Ha, ha, ha. But the funny thing about it is it plays pretty well as a sort of dynasty meets horror, in the sense that, you know, this is a very upper crust, 1% group of jerks, you know, who all have their kind of weird eccentricities and stuff. And the more that Grace is sort of thwarting them, the more we applaud her, and she becomes as violent as the game promises. And ultimately what ends up happening is it's revealed that the reason that it's such a sort of big dramatic deal is these people have all made a deal with Satan, who is known as Mr. Baal. He's known as that in this movie sequel as well.
It's I think it's Le Baal. Yeah,
Le Baal, that's right, Mr. Le Baal, that's right. And which, you know, I always wondered, is that like the bail to set you free in a way, I suppose.
I thought I've started reading the Bible again from page 1, and there's constant references to it's either Baal or Baal, the B-A.
Yeah, there's lots of B names in there, Beelzebub, Balthamore. It's like Satan stopped at B. He was the B team, and he said, "I guess that's my letter."
Well, but the thing is, like early on, especially in the Old Testament, there's a lot of people seem to worship Baal, which is I guess it's a stand-in for like different deities that are not God. So I'm not sure if it's supposed to be the same entity, but that's the vibe I got from these movies. Is that kind of who they're enslaved to?
Right. So anyway, the movie ends with her sort of finding all this out and can't believe it, but she prevails. And sure enough, as she's killed a number of the family members and sort of, you know, covered her pristine white wedding dress in blood, she is victorious, and the rest of the family members explode in sort of this combustible sort of thing that you've heard about can happen in life. And they cover her with more blood and guts and goo. And then sort of Le Baal appears briefly to sort of acknowledge that she's done well, and then he disappears, and that's the end of the movie. She basically lights a cigarette, which she's been itching for the whole time, as she sits triumphant on the steps of this big mansion, as it basically turns into hellfire behind her, suggesting that LaBelle is probably like, okay, that family's out of it, so we're just gonna burn the whole damn thing down. And then, surprisingly or not surprisingly, that's exactly where the sequel picks up, with her on the stairs, thinking she's okay, but she's not. She's been wounded and she passes out, and soon there's an ambulance coming and they take her off to the hospital, where she quickly finds out, as if you don't mind me just saying to get the exposition out of the way, she's in trouble in two ways. One is there's blood all over her dress, which she's changed out of now after they put her in medical garb. And the cops say, that isn't your blood. So they're about to arrest her for murder, and maybe arson. And the second thing is Mr. LaBelle's lawyer, played by a very droll and underplaying Elijah Wood, who's very funny in it because he does so, he's speaking of A to B only. But he shows up and says, oops, you're not done. There's now an elevated game that has even more at stake. It's not only your life, but if you win against the remaining families, which are on sort of the council of Satan on this planet Earth, and run the world like Illuminati. That's one of the funnier jokes about here, is that, yes, they are running the awful world we often live in. Then you can be really the king of the world, or queen of the world, as it were, and rule over everything, again suggesting that Satan's domain is somehow planet Earth. One of the funnier jokes. She doesn't want to do that, but she's forced into it. And the fly in the ointment, which creates not only the 2 in the sequel's title, but in sort of the gamesmanship, is her emergency contact shows up after she's taken to the hospital, and it's her estranged foster sister from 7 years ago that she had a falling out with and has not seen her. And they're still angry at each other, and so they're quipping and bitching at each other the whole time, while trying to rely on each other to fight off these Satanists from all walks of the earth, trying to kill them on a now country club setting where one of the other families owns it, named Danvers. They're sort of the ones who are the number one people in charge, and now they're having to fight to maintain that because of this new rule. So it becomes sort of the sisterhood story, as well as, a much more blatant story about Satanism, which is really funny. And that's where I think, maybe, dare I say, knowing you as I do, you probably got the bigger kick out of this. I think it's also where I think some of the punches land a little bit stronger. Making fun of Dynasty and sort of the 1%, that's very easy pickings, and dare I say, kind of old hat in a way. I mean, Dynasty, my God, that's 50 years ago, isn't it? But with making fun of sort of the world order and the idea that Satanists are running it, and just, what that constitutes as power, et cetera, makes for, I think, a very, dare I say, richer film in a certain way, because of the fact that that's much more relevant to today and all the conversation around things like the Illuminati and conspiracies, et cetera. But it also, I think, allows the filmmakers to even make funnier digs at what constitutes family and connection and all that. While she's struggling to find common ground with her sibling, nobody in the families that represent Satanism are worth a squat. They're all evil. They all hate each other. They don't have any love lost within their family for the other people who are like them. So it becomes kind of this interesting editorial on what actually constitutes your tribe.
It does, and I think that's I think you might have hit on it. There's more to play with here than the simple kind of 1% joke, and I think this came out within a few months of the original Knives Out in 2019.
That's right.
And I didn't care for either of the movies, I think, because they felt to me, and I'm not inside the filmmakers' heads, but we were coming towards the end of Trump v1, and I felt like this is kind of a tantrum lashing out at the 1%. It was just too easy a target. And what I like about this film is they're kind of going, they're telescoping out from even that. These are the people that run the 1%, essentially, because it's 6 families at the top of absolutely everything, represented initially by David Cronenberg in a fantastic cameo. He's sitting in his kind of study, but it's also in a bed, like he's ill or something, watching a CNN type of news program And there's war footage going on all these different screens, tanks moving in. There's a Chiron talking about how, things have degraded. And he picks up his cell phone and says, enact the ceasefire. And he hangs up, and immediately there's one of those giant blazing graphics
Breaking
on the
news.
CNN channel. Yeah, breaking news, ceasefire achieved. And it's like, that is a wonderful gag.
Yeah.
And they don't comment on it. They don't make anything about it. It just establishes who this guy is and what he's capable of. And then he gets a text on his phone basically talking about the events of the night before, and how our bride, who is Grace, played just wonderfully by
Samara Weaving.
Sorry, I was thinking
No,
I was thinking Sarah Michelle Gellar. She's the other great actress that's in the sequel. But Samara Weaving.
And I say Kathryn Newton is the most perfect at the resting bitch face and the cynical character playing your sister, who has obviously a heart on her sleeve, even though she's so bitter. But she's great. They're great foils for each other because they're two peas from the same pod, but also slightly different, and that's very funny.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about her too, because that's the other surprising thing. I mean, this movie has a ton more heart, I think, than the first one, and also a genuine happy ending. Whereas the first film ends kind of, we're happy that Grace got out of there, and she, everyone kind of blew up and everything. She's finally got her cigarette, but it's just kind of like, it's just an ending. Kind of expected, right?
Can I build on one point that you made before because I think
please.
you made a great point. I think one of the things that was, I like Knives Out a lot, but I grant you, I will give it to you that I think sometimes eating the rich is easy. They're an easy target. They have been since the dawn of time. It's let them eat cake. It's all the problems with King George and, the bubble, which we now call people living in their own tribe or in their own bubble, and rich people don't understand what the common man's plight is. And that's all probably been true forever and a day. But it especially was true of that time, where I think there was this need to get back at the people who were taking control again, and they represent corporate America interests and stuff like that, which is sort of a cliche, but in this case, probably true with Trump, but certainly the second term. But I think that's not enough for us as villains, and just as I think like James Bond has suffered when they have people who want to take over the world because they're rich people and they just can't have enough. I always liked Goldfinger best because his needs were small. He just wanted his gold to be more valuable, so he wanted to make the other gold toxic. I think that's so brilliantly small, and yet it's quite a plan though just to make that happen. But,
well, it's also like Hans Gruber, painted as this, big anarchist, but he was just a thief. Yeah.
I remind you, a very world-class intellectual thief, as he explained to Mrs. McLean. I'm Mr. McLean, yippee-ki-yay. Anyway, I'm going off on my own recommendation. Here, and I dare say in Agatha Christie, what I think always made her stories great is that she didn't have to underline the 1%. The rich people. It took place there, and what made it witty right off the bat was, these people who shouldn't have any problems have problems. They're petty, they're jealous, they have mind games and enemies and all this stuff when they shouldn't. Life should be Riley, the life of Riley for them. And I think in this one, by turning them into really Satanists and who control the world, it's an opportunity to not just show that maybe they're evil people across the board, but I think their evil is so mundane and so lazy that's what it becomes about. Is like, I think they say that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I would argue that this film says that absolute power makes everybody off their game. So if somebody who's maybe a little hungry, like Grace, and dare I say her sister, who's also one of the have-nots, they have a little bit more at stake just in their lives, let alone knowing that they've probably had to fight for things all of their life as foster children. So those are unsaid things, but they're there, and they give it a little bit more meaning, just like I think Agatha Christie did in her stories, without ever having to say, this is a good versus bad story. It's like Columbo. I don't know if you ever watched Columbo. They never said it, but the fun of Columbo, in addition to showing us the murder first, so we are almost sort of a conspiracy, sort of the cohort of that bad guy. But Columbo comes in, and all these rich murderers, famous, successful, elite, think they're so much above this scruffy little unshaven, ma'am, sorry, this, that, and the other thing. And it's all a ruse for him to just get their confidence and drop their guard. And then it becomes about, sort of a class system in a way, but they never said that in the show. And I think when it's there, without being the lead as it was in the first movie here, it plays better because, they don't have to be so overstated. And there's other stuff they can spend more of their time on.
Well, I think the introduction of Kathryn Newton as Faith, the sister, as she kind of barges into the hospital room, there's this whole, 5 minute or so exchange where they're kind of reconnecting. I mean, it's a rocky reconnection, but you really get this sense that, okay, I was reading Save the Cat Writes Horror, a fantastic book. I was reading it this morning, and in the passage I read, they nailed what makes a great horror movie a great horror movie. Besides the scares, besides the themes, it's if you took the horror elements out of it, are the characters and situations compelling enough that you would want to watch it anyway? And this 5 minute introduction of the Faith character did that for me. I'm like, I could watch the two of these just have this weird post-trauma foster drama reconnection film and just have it be like a road picture of them going back to New York or something like that. But no, they get roped into playing this game, and Faith is, I think that's one of the things that is a strength of this film above the first one, is Grace is not alone. She's not doing it, it's not just, I'm doing Die Hard 2, even though Die Hard 2 is a great movie. She has someone that she has to look out for, someone that can help her, someone that ultimately gets in the way in a couple of instances. And they're not always together. They get split up. They get roughed up by different people who are playing this game. It's very intense. But I just love that dynamic that instantly this character who could have just been the annoying little sister, even though she's, probably in her mid to late 20s, she felt like a real person. She felt like someone who was annoyed and then concerned and then just like, oh, great, I haven't talked to you in, however many years, and now I have to bail you out of this hospital situation. What did you do? You're married now? You didn't even invite me to the wedding? Like, what's all this about? It felt very real and not just, exploitive exploitation movie junk. And the dynamic between Grace and Faith as the movie goes on is paralleled by the main couple that they're up against for this council position. They are the children of Mr. Danforth, Ursula, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, and her brother Titus, played by Sean Hattasy.
Right.
They're mirrors of our protagonists.
Right.
Now, you said that these families don't really care about each other. It's established that Titus is a psychopath,
Right.
and he's initially, and for a good chunk of the movie, his little sister, I don't know what the age difference is, but he towers over her. But Sarah Michelle Gellar, because we all know her as Buffy, and she's always had this kind of commanding, wry presence. She bosses him around. She kind of makes fun of him. She puts up with some of his crap because she knows that she's got him on a short leash. But when he kind of stands up for himself, he really goes hard and turns into this dangerous creature that turns out that she can't control. And that it shows the softer side of her character, and realizes that she probably should have invested a little bit more into that relationship, but that realization comes way too late in the story. And I think her last scene in the film, yes, we are talking spoilers, was rather touching because of her final words to her brother. I love that parallel that keeps popping up, throughout the movie to show these are real people inside this horror movie situation, but they're not stock characters. There are some other stock characters, but they're also so entertaining and funny. And, they've got weird weapons that the only weapons they're allowed to use are the ones that their ancestors had available to them during whichever time period they made their deal with Mr. LaBelle, which was a great touch. There's so much going on in this hour and 45-minute movie or whatever that it almost felt like it was, 2 movies worth of stuff shoved into one movie, but without the inelegance that implies.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is so true in that they explain in the book about the Save the Cat Writes Horror, and just anybody who's done a deep dive on how to write horror. I think we all think that it's easy to just scare people and jump scares and a boogeyman of some sort, and in an isolated setting and you're off to the races. Yeah, that's a good start, but you have to have other things that keep you invested in it. And what you're talking about in investing in these people is a sense of groundedness, even as ludicrous as the story may be. There has to be some not only genuine stakes for them to be involved with, which is one of the reasons I think superhero movies falter, because they can't really be defeated. First of all, it's a franchise, let alone they're not really human.
Yeah.
But also that there are things that are recognizable that, to your point, would be an interesting story even without the horror elements of it, and the horror elements don't prevent them from having that issue as well. If a married couple is not getting along and suddenly intruders come into the house, as in Funny Games, as tough as that movie was to watch, that makes it all the more so, because the husband character is sort of weak, and the wife is sort of irritated with him all the time, and then somehow that kind of plays even with these intruders in the house, and suddenly that doesn't go away just because, well, now we have to rally and be there for each other because we have real enemies. No. And the other thing that illustrates that point that you made that I think is very true is when Titus beats up Faith, he keeps beating her up, and it's not done with crazy props that some of the scenes are, where it's a little funny. I mean, there's a great scene where Grace is fighting her fiance's or her husband's ex-girlfriend, and they spray each other with mace, and they're kind of going around like this trying to fight, and they can't find the other person, so they're like throwing things here. It's like, I mean, it's almost like a bad Helen Keller joke that they would tell when you're a kid. But anyway, there's those kinds of scenes that are silly and play up the comedy of this horror comedy. But then there's the realistic scenes where, yeah, Titus is not a funny character. He's an absolute awful psychopath, and he beats up Faith, and he keeps wanting to beat her up. And that sits very badly with his sister, who he then hits too because he can't control himself. And she's probably never been assaulted in her life, or maybe she was as a kid, and suddenly it dawns on her what she's dealing with and has been for the last 30 years being around this man. And it suddenly gives it this depth that makes everything a little bit more meaningful and connective for us as an audience, let alone sort of more meaningful and heavier as just a story. I think it's funny how they always will say, comedy actors are really great dramatic actors. Well, they are, and that's because comedy is pain. It's just a funny version of pain. Comedy is drama plus time, right? Or tragedy plus time, I guess. So I think when you're doing even a comedy or a horror movie, the more you can somehow sneak it back to something that's recognizable, relatable, maybe seems possible, all the better. I think it not only makes the story more interesting with the characters, according to the book that you talked about, but it's unexpected. And when those kind of things happen in horror, because oftentimes you can get it way ahead of a horror movie, it's coming, they have to hit certain death thresholds and certain jump scares, and they're going to go into a dark house tonight. I wonder what could happen. Only bad things. But then if something good happens, you'd be surprised by that. So it's a way of keeping things fresh, things evolving, and I dare say, as crazy as circumstances are, making them believable. I mean, that's the thing, is it has to be believable, even if it's the most ludicrous thing, like a flying superhero or a boogeyman or, a John Wick who can off 500 killers and keep walking.
Now, there's a couple things I want to touch on.
Sure.
That you brought up. One, this is a complete superficial thing that I'm about to say, but I think everyone needs to pay attention in Hollywood. Sarah Michelle Gellar looks amazing.
Yes.
You know why she looks amazing? Because she's in her early 50s by now.
Yeah.
And I don't think she's had any work done.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it.
She's got wrinkles and lines and everything. I mean, she's still beautiful, but she's still a recognizable person. And especially when the idea of she's playing this, impossibly wealthy, 0.0001%, rich person, you'd think, so she could have an excuse to show up and look all, Botoxed and like she's trying to stay forever 21. But, she has aged very gracefully. And I think that's also a power of, her character. I mean, she did that cameo, and I know what you did last summer, the remake from last year, but that was in like a dream sequence where everything was blown out with the Barbara Walters filter. So she still was they were trying to make it look like DC from, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But here she's just allowed to, be an older actress without any accoutrement, and I think that underscores something about her resilience, about her fearlessness. I'm not making this, not meaning to make this sound sexist. I mean, what happened to Mickey Rourke is upsetting to even think about.
Yeah.
So it's all across the board. But seeing an actor or an actress in this day and age just growing, in accepting their age, accepting their what comes with that is kind of a beautiful thing. The next thing I want to say, I lost my train of thought.
Well, let me just chime in to talk about Sarah Michelle Gellar for a second. I agree with everything you said. In fact, the one thing that I think is sad about the horror genre, if you're successful in Hollywood, is they tend to stereotype you. And I don't think she gets as many offerings for roles because of the fact that she was so successful as Buffy. It's an iconic television character. And she's figured go where the work is and get paid properly, and everything else as a star of her stature should. And she's done some of those other things before, whether it's I Know What You Did Last Summer or other things. She was so good in Cruel Intentions, the sort of teenage updating of Le Liaison Dangereuse, and she plays villains very well. I mean, to your
Wait,
point,
just real quick, Jeff.
Sure.
I think there's a cinematic universe here where Cruel Intentions is the prequel to Ready or Not 2. This is what that character was doing 30 years ago.
And then she discovered Satan and realized that, hey, to get back into the playing field, she needs to go through his little guidance. But it's funny because, to your point, I think she is here. She manages to bring a great deal of sadness to her character, and she's very good in the scene she has. She's funny, she's sexy, she's attractive without being, plasticized like so many people in Hollywood. And she's vulnerable. I mean, it's a kind of an amazing little supporting performance. I also think she's an interesting enough woman as in her real life and what she's been through and probably what she's seen in Hollywood that she brings that to it. See, to me, if I'm James Bond producers, I would be looking at is there something we can do with her as a character? Can she be the Bond girl, even though she's older? Can she be the new M? Can she be the villain?
The villain. I was just going to say that.
Could be really good. And then you get a person who's not just, mustache twirling and evil, and you can't wait for them to make some sort of dumb move that ends up killing them in a fantastical way where Bond can make a pithy, punny quip about. But, what's her reason? I mean, is she, there because she grew up in a family that didn't treat women well, and she wants to make sure she gets what is coming to her, whatever. Who knows? I mean, there's lots of different, maybe just cast her as the character as written in a script, even if it's written for a man. I mean, I think she's a talented enough person. She could pull that off without having to have too many adjustments made into that screenplay. But people like that deserve more than they're getting out of Hollywood. And I dare say, I think people who are talented in Hollywood horror deserve it too. I'm just going to throw out one name as an actor. I'm always shocked that Jeffrey Combs really was just sort of relegated to the horror industry after his breakout performance in Reanimator. He's hilarious in that movie, and he should have been put in sitcoms. He should have been put in all kinds of funny comedies, and instead they always had him play basically a variation on Herbert West, where he's the maniacal bad guy in the horror movie, and he's the best thing in the movie, even if it's a B movie. But talent like that makes those kind of things, they're Anthony Hopkins in their own way. Now, I'll grant you Anthony Hopkins is up here, but it's funny because he was in Hollywood for a good 30 years before, Hannibal Lecter happened, and he was able to transcend any kind of stereotyping. But more often than not, if somebody comes out and is first known as horror, they can't break out of that, and that's unfair, because there are good actors like Sarah Michelle Gellar, like Jeffrey Combs, who maybe aren't quite Sir Anthony Hopkins, but they certainly deserve more chances than they often get.
But yeah, I mean, within the genre, they're certainly pulling off Hopkins-esque levels of performance because they're totally committed. Yeah, I did remember what I was going to talk about.
Oh, good.
And so it's that, and there's another tangent I want to get into. But the fight, it's not really a fight because Faith is not able to. It's also funny because there's a character named Faith in a movie that also has the former Buffy in it. Anyway.
Yes, and Faith and Grace. I mean, it's like for two foster kids, it's like,
and they even make
good, hopeful names. Maybe they'll be okay.
Right. And one of the characters even makes a joke about that in the movie because they're like, yeah. Anyway, when Faith is getting beaten up in the hallway by Titus, it is, I would have to say it's a deliberate callback to True Romance, where Patricia Arquette is getting beaten up in
Yeah.
that hotel room by
Yes.
James Gandolfini. I mean,
Good
even
thought.
some of
Yeah.
the facial makeup and some of the punches. I mean, it's funny because not funny, but the unrated cut of that movie is now there's a lot of that in this R-rated multiplex movie. How far we've come in the last 30 plus years. But what I wanted to touch on is sort of similar to that. Eh, This is a horror comedy only insofar as I think it deals with elements that or themes that horror movies deal with,
Right.
Satanism,
Right.
conspiracies and that kind of stuff. But in the same way that Evil Dead 2 technically follows those same guidelines, there's nothing scary in this movie.
Yeah.
There's
Not really.
nothing kinda ooga booga. It's
Yeah.
it's tense because we wanna see Grace and Faith get out of some of these very sticky situations, but it's not jump scary or, not ethereal, but, mysterious or, frightening in the way that you would think of even regular horror comedies. It's just like a splatterfest
Mhm. Yeah.
comedy.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, it's got the it's funny. I think the interesting thing about horror, and even when you bring in comedy, it's a pretty broad spectrum of what it can be. Horror often can be just because of the subject material. Okay, Satan is the ultimate villain, and it's supernatural, so that's horror. But you're right; it's not exactly. They don't even have that many jump scares in here, and if anything, they're just sort of legitimate scares that would be occurring in any kind of thriller or adventure movie where you're fighting against forces that are coming to get you. Um,
Yeah, I mean, the jump scares here
yeah,
are more in the sort of
yeah,
action movie jump scares where someone will just run out of nowhere with a a light pole or something to try and bludgeon one of the characters. It's not, a cat jumping
that's
out of a
right.
closet or yeah. Um,
That's
but
right. That's right.
to that point, I think, and this is one of the reasons I love Samara Weaving, not only because she's, cute as a button, also very funny and very fun, but
Yeah,
also because she, at this point, again, I feel like this is a deliberate career decision. She is firmly hanging out in what could unflatteringly be called the genre ghetto. She
yeah,
loves
yeah,
doing like crime and horror pictures. She could have had, I think, a giant, career as like a mainstream kind of Hollywood actress. And that was my disappointment with the first Ready or
right,
Not, because I think I'd first really noticed her in a movie called Mayhem, which is, if you
right.
haven't seen, is
That's right.
fantastic. But I was like, this felt like her big breakout, and I really didn't like the movie that much. But here, I think it uses all of her talents, her comedic timing, her commitment to playing a character who's constantly getting beaten up and
Yeah,
injured and run through with things,
that's right.
and also her tremendous, those beautiful empathetic eyes that create
Yes.
real drama in the scenes that call for it.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. In fact, let's get her out of that sort of ghetto, if you will, just because she's worthy of more. And the film spends an awful lot of time on her face. In fact, it's both films were kind of mostly we don't see a lot of her except maybe those eyes because she's often covered in blood and mud and muck and everything else. But the thing I like about her too is she's drop dead gorgeous, but she doesn't ever act like she's drop dead gorgeous. She doesn't move like she's a dainty, pretty woman who's maybe came from the world of modeling or acting as the ingenue. She's very physical. She's very tough and rough and tumble. I think she's doing a lot of her own stunt work. She's certainly doing the throwing around and physical stuff, even if it's not necessarily every crash into something. Of course, she's not going to do that. But and even with all that, she's tough and legitimate and believable in it. But she also is very, very believable in conjuring up the pathos and the vulnerability. I mean, her eyes are able to communicate a lot of like she's hurt. And that's what I also like about Kathryn Newton in this is they play these very cynical characters and have made kind of a cottage industry in a way of playing these tough cookies, if you will. I mean, Kathryn Newton's first big claim to fame was playing Reese Witherspoon's defiant daughter in Big Little Lies. And she's very good. And, she just has that kind of like stare at you until you realize how much she hates you kind of face. But there's pain in that face, whether it's in Big Little Lies or Ready or Not too. And these actresses very smartly understand that a tough character is only so tough. And what drives them to be tough is probably the need not to get hurt more. And yet these characters continue to get hurt more. And when they're with each other, they're doing as much damage in some respects as those who are hunting them and trying to kill them, because they say words that wound. And those kind of things stick much more. And it's funny, they don't give up. Like, well, now that we're on the run together, we're just going to forgive all things and be happy. No. That's not right. And just read Ian's book about it. But the faults are still there, and they hurt just as much. And I also have to say, and just a little nod to, since we're talking about spoilers, Save the Cat. The first rule of Save the Cat is whenever you want to show somebody as a good character, the character needs to do something very early on that shows that he or she is a good person, like save a cat from a tree or something like that, hence the title. Here at the very end, I kept thinking, are they going to save that goat? Yes, they do. There's a goat tied up, and it's like, oh no, please don't have them kill the goat. I'm a pet guy. I love animals. I get very antsy in horror movies when pets are killed, because they're usually the training ground for the serial killer or the boogeyman before he gets to human flesh. And very rarely does it really seem justified that we have to even go there, and it's just gratuitous. And I was worried about that here, but that's the whole thing, is at the end they save them, and it's the laughs at the end and the charm and I dare say kind of the heart at the end, where they're rescuing the one creature worth being saved out of the whole kit and caboodle, because everybody else is in the pit of hell, and there's no reason that we should be sacrificing anybody. I hate the fact that that's just part and parcel of sort of the shtick of the cult and the idea of Satanism. But here, even the filmmakers and screenwriters defy that by saying, you know what, we're going to save that goat. It would be an easy last bit of bloodletting that we could show, and everybody goes, oh, I hate those films, let's kill them for killing the goat. Nope, we're going to save the goat.
Well, I think that's I wasn't expecting that they were going to kill the goat, because I think that would have pushed this movie into that realm of shock and horror. And that just wasn't the last, the hour and a half leading up to it. But I will say, I did like, it goes comedic dark.
Yes.
Like this idea that there's these 6 families who are vying for this ring. And I love the just down to the production design, what they did here. They really thought this through. I want to for once actually credit the directors here, and they co-wrote the movie, or one of them did. So it's Martin Bettinelli Olpin and Tyler Gillette. And it was co-written by Guy Busick, R. Christopher Murray, and Mr. Bettinelli Olpin. There, I've gotten my IMDb out of the way.
There you go.
But the country club casino hotel that that most of the action takes place in,
Right.
At the beginning of the film, when the Danvers family realizes that this is going to be probably the location of this new game of hide and seek, they have to clear everybody off the grounds, and there's a wedding that's going on, which is severely broken up in a very funny way, and that whole setting of the reception area comes back to play later. But as they're leaving the hotel, and you kind of got to watch out for this, but the logo, the icon above the door on sort of this like metal awning or a dome, is the same one that's imprinted on the signet ring that everybody's fighting
Yes,
over.
that's right.
It's just this great little nice touch, and it makes you wonder, if there is an Illuminati, what symbols are out there right in front of our faces that we don't even know about. But during the course of this movie, as everyone's kind of fighting each other, we're getting dribs and drabs of the rules from our Elijah Wood character, who I think is just so terrific. He's another guy that kind of left big, huge paycheck Hollywood movies behind, probably because he doesn't need to work again ever after Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's also immersed in genre. I mean, he was in the Maniac remake from a few years ago. He was terrific in last year's Toxic Avenger, very similar to the role he plays here as a toady who's got a little bit more going on than you think the first time you look at him. But he talks about, he's constantly like reading from the rule book and kind of admonishing people like, no, don't do that, or otherwise you're going to be in trouble with the big guy, the guy downstairs. One of them is whoever is, if one of the participants, one of the hunters, kills another hunter, even accidentally, then not only are they out of the game, but their entire bloodline is wiped out. And we get a couple of those here, so you can just imagine all over the country. They don't actually show this, but people just blowing up or exploding randomly. but I did love this exploitation of the rules, including, and again, spoilers down there. The very end of the film, I thought was a lovely example, pretty subtle, but also being on the nose, if such a thing is possible, where Grace gets the ring. She is now, I will skip over how she gets it, but she is now the head of basically the world at the behest of LaBelle. And she says, as my first act, I give up this, I give up this power. And one of the other people who's on the council looks over at Elijah Wood and says, can she do that? And he says, and this is so beautiful, he says, yes, but I'm not sure what to do because no one had ever accounted for anybody giving up that much power. I was like, that is so
Right.
sweet. And it underlines the thesis of who both Grace and Faith are. They very much, from their circumstances, growing up in foster care, being bounced around, and then eventually being separated. You think back to the first movie, and Grace very much wanting to marry into this family, not because she knows the evil that they're up to, but just it represents stability, and maybe she could use that to go back and take care of her sister.
That's right.
That altruism runs through both films, but it really comes into play here, and this is why this movie, much more than other recent examples, including the other example of a big film coming out this weekend that is also directed by two people. I think this has it over that film in spades in terms of theme, performance, story, and tone.
I agree. And I think there's also, dare I say, an example that screenwriters can learn from watching a movie like this. You may think, well, it's horror, it's a sequel. How much can be ascertained? Well, a lot, actually, because the thing that is interesting about a movie like Ready or Not 2, and sometimes very indicative of the entire genre of horror, is they seem but simple. It's very easy to explain a horror movie essentially in that classic elevator pitch. What's it about? There's a shark that is found its way into the waters of a New England residential town or a resort town, and it's going to screw up the 4th of July unless they get rid of this man-eater. Boom. That's the plot of Jaws. Now, as William Goldman, I've said this on your show before, I'm going to say it again because not everybody watches every show, and hopefully they'll at least hear it once.
The devil, you say?
Well, they're getting larger and larger, so maybe they are not missing anything, but I'm going to say it anyway. William Goldman, in his book Adventures in the Screen Trade, writes about plots in Hollywood have the top line plot, which I just explained about Jaws, and then the sort of what's it really about plot, and sort of what is it that's really kind of driving it, that is the emotional stakes, I think, or maybe the end for the audience beyond, oh, this is just a crackling yarn. What makes it stick around? Because lots of times there's crackling yarns. They have to figure out this. They have to find this. They have to discover who's holding the national treasure, blah, blah, blah. But what is the emotional thing that keeps you coming back? And you know what it is in Jaws? And people laugh whenever I say this, but it's basically about Brody getting his cajones back. He's moved from New York, where he was a tough guy cop, and here he's a fish out of water, just like the shark. It's literally a fish out of water story on both levels, because he's not used to the locals. He's not used to the water, doesn't like the water. I know about you, Chief. You're afraid to go into the water. That's some bad hat, Harry. His wife, the very first scene he's in, he wakes up and he goes, you see the boys? He goes, they're out in the back. And he goes, you're supposed to say in the back in the yard by the car. Like, she's already corrected him. Everybody is telling him what to do. You said the accent wrong. I'll do the signs, Chief. Don't worry. No, Martin, you can't close the beaches. Hooper drives the boat, Chief. He's always being told you're second. You're not a man. You're not cool. You're the underling. Yet he's the chief of the police. He's supposed to be the top guy. Oh, this is my charter, Quint. Yeah. So start acting like it. Ultimately, he finds it at the end when suddenly he loses the glasses. You see that tough Bronx, probably broken nose when he was a teenager in a fight face. You can see that New York cop. In this movie, it's about family. It's about what are you connecting to? These people have money and power, and they don't even need this power if they don't really want it. But they've got all the advantages of the world, and yet they're not nice to each other. They're petty. They sell each other out in a moment's notice. And yet here you've got these two foster girls, which is very important that they're declared as foster children, because it's not an easy life. Even if you have good foster parents, you're going into somebody else's home and having to acclimate, and it's somehow you've you've lost the first round of life, or you don't have a stable family.
And hopefully you go to one home and that's
That's
it. But
exactly right.
it
Exactly
doesn't
right.
always work out that way. I
Exactly.
mean,
So, and that's, to me, what keeps this most interesting. And your book said it too, is what is the relationship between these two girls? If it was like, oh, an old boyfriend and they re-spark their love, maybe. But the fact that it's a deeper one with hurt and pain and already horrors, if you will, I think it gives this resonance. And what I'm saying originally too is it's a very simple elevator premise, but the complexity of that dynamic continues to add nuance and verve and interest throughout. And that's where a lot of the complications come from, more than just a plot that has so many moving parts that you can't keep track of it without a scorecard.
I think, we've been talking for, almost an hour now about this film in very intellectual terms. And I don't want anyone to get the idea that this film is anything but a blast.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a guy who gets shoved into an industrial washing machine. I mean, the kills in this movie are just wonderful. And, even the fight scenes, like you mentioned, the one where there's the pepper spray fight, and then they're flailing around in this wedding reception room, and one person gets thrown into the DJ stand, and then Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart starts playing. The one missed opportunity, I think, is because there's a lot of percussion, especially in the extended version of that song. I think they did it once where someone gets thrown into something during one of the cymbal crashes on the soundtrack. They should have done that for every single one. That would have been perfect.
That would have been funny.
But, there's all these like great little gags, like at the beginning when the hunt starts, Faith and Grace are placed out in the middle of the golf course, and then the hunters all have their own golf carts outside the mansion that they have to drive quite a distance to get to their prey.
Right.
And Titus and Ursula, because they own the estate, they're the only ones that have keys in their golf carts.
Yes, that's right.
And what I thought was a fascinating little bit of subtext that, again, I don't even know if they talk about it here, but it's something that you kind of observe. All of these people, for generations, their souls have been consigned to hell based on what their ancestors had bargained for in order to have literal generational wealth going throughout, the end of time. Right. So they've never known what it's like to struggle, or, to need anything, or to want anything that they couldn't, snap their fingers and have literal servants come in and bring to them. Mm-hmm. But they also don't have any concept of what an eternal damnation is like. Mm-hmm. So they are afraid of Labail, but it seems only kind of in a vague conceptual way. Like they don't want to make him mad. What they're more afraid of is someone in their family screwing up the hunt and losing out on the wealth and the power. Yes. As we see in one of the brothers who came from London, which is very interesting. They cut to London to grab the two representatives from that country, because they've got like England, China, Spain, like people from all over the world. London, you expect to be, a couple of pasty old, British folks, but these are like two Pakistani brothers in a disco, and one of them has an American accent. It's very strange and also perhaps very telling. But one of them ends up losing everything, and he's he's beside himself for the rest of the movie. Yes. Now, I want to actually ask you about this, because this is something that I don't know if it's a loophole or if it's a rule that I missed. But at one point, he consigns his wife, and they hate each other, right, to stand in for him in the hunt, right? Because the one brother dies, he's the washing machine kill, so it goes to the replacement, brother. He's like, I don't want to do that. He's sitting there talking all kinds of smack while they're watching the feed on real time on these giant televisions. Like, oh, they're dead. This isn't going to last 5 minutes. And, I would have done this differently. When it's his turn, he's like, I can't do this. I'm going to sign. Oh, my wife's over there. I hate her. I'll have her do it and sign this in blood, and she'll go out and do the hunt. She goes out there, and there's a great scene where she's in this SUV and getting ready to run down Grace. Grace steps out of the way. The wife keeps going and busts through the iron gate, and she keeps driving. Yeah. She's left all of this behind.
Yeah, she never comes back.
Jeff, why doesn't she explode?
I asked the same thing when I was watching it. Like it didn't make any sense. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly why, unless maybe it happened later. But yeah, it's one of those little things that took me out for a second and wondered what about that, and then kind of got back to the other people quickly. But yeah, there's one or two little logic things like that in almost every movie, that you see something that's a flopped film thing because they didn't shoot the person looking at the reaction in the right direction, or some missed thing that's on the cutting room floor that explained a certain line that now makes sense with that line back in the director's cut. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, there's a couple little things like that here that catch us. I also have to say bravo to the filmmakers. All of them are men, the two screenwriters and the three screenwriters, and the man who is a screenwriter and co-director, for giving us two leads and the complex, dynamics between the two women. And then I dare say the third most, I think, dynamic and complex character is the Sarah Michelle Gellar character.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is, I think, kind of a horror movie for women in its weird way, because a lot of times women love horror and they don't, and they'll stay away because of the gore. But this is funny gore. I will say this though, this is the thing that I love though. Like there's some great kills in here, like the washing machine, the industrial strength washing machine oh, that's right, that's what's underneath the hotels. But they hesitate, like when they should stop it, like when is enough, like, well, we need his phone, but then there's also this like and then they look at his hands and his feet and it's all melted flesh, and like they're kind of like, it's very, very funny. So you get a little bit of, like, again, the grounded humanity in it, and especially because they're probably not horror fans on the outside who go to horror movies, so seeing a body in a situation like that would be gross to them.
It was gross to me. I mean, it was a kind of a cool effect. One thing I want to pick up on that you mentioned, the fact that this is, all guys screenwriting and two, male directors, and yet having very finely drawn female protagonists. It's not a new phenomenon, but you'd think so because of all the talk about, like, well, we get a lot of movies now. I mean, not a whole lot, but the ones that we get that are written and directed by female, creatives, they tend to lead to the cliche of the strong female character, which, in my not so humble estimation, always leads to anything but. They're the ones that are acting the most like men and having kind of the worst traits of men. They're almost not allowed to have nuance and vulnerability that, and specifically in the field, in genre. There's a reason that people always talk about, Laurie Strode and Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor, and all characters who were, written by and created by men with, some help in terms of the Terminator. James Cameron had some help there, yeah. Right? Yep. But it's almost as if there's, it's kind of a hard thing to pinpoint. But I find that when I'm watching a movie that was written by guys with a focus on a female lead, they're almost always more interesting. Like the female writers, and I'm sure there are exceptions, I just haven't seen them or noticed them. They tend to go almost like they have something to prove by going so far in the extreme direction. Like, oh, I also forgot to make them a person.
No, that's a good point. I think it's tricky writing women characters for women as well as men. We see so few leads that, they seem to have to try to get it right all the more and maybe overcompensate here and undercompensate there. But, it's here, there. I think with the sister story, there's different ways sisters act and angry sisters towards each other. They're not bros. And I dare say, I think too many screenwriters today are bros, and they keep writing the main characters as these kind of dude and bros and like all that kind of stuff. We just had a problem with a movie this last week that I think has some examples of that. But I think they rate them as smart, caring people, and hopefully the female qualities or whatever that come through are done and sort of filled in by actresses who are generally stating, if anything, parts of female characters that aren't underdeveloped, and that is maybe compassion or understanding or listening, things like that. They're in a world where they have to listen more, so they're paying attention a little bit more to what's being said, and the words have more meaning and stick. So whatever it was that got these guys to write these two really strong female characters, good for them. And they don't fight beyond their realm. I mean, I kept wondering, is this film now going to show that Faith somehow finds a way to annihilate Titus here and, turn the tables on him in a woman's way, where like she dare I say, pardon my French, but keeps hitting him in the groin and then continues and, does the old, I'm the woman who knows how to get the male, by just hitting him there kind of thing. No, she's beaten to a pulp because this man, probably can lift 250 pounds bench press, and she can't lift 25 pounds bench press. She's not that person. And, even though she's trying to fight him and save her life and keep from getting killed, it's a reckoning of like, this is what fighting is, folks. It's not this like, oh, I'm going to get up and walk away from this and be all fine, or I'm a woman and I can hold my own against a man, no matter how many good belts he has. And that's writing for a woman too, which I think is smart. And we get lulled into this, well, she's going to be able to fight like she's MME, and it's like, no, that's not how it works. Or MMA, rather.
Right. And I think that that hallway fight is a great example. We kind of touched on it before. Like, I didn't know how she was going to get out of that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought because they clearly established that Grace has her own, life or death struggle going on in another part of the hotel.
Right.
But it isn't until Ursula shows up and something that you had said earlier, like this kind of realization of horror on her face as she's like,
yeah,
oh my God, my brother is beating this, 20-something-year-old girl to death, and he doesn't care.
Right.
But she kind of like, it almost goes back to the Pamela Voorhees thing from Friday the 13th Part 2, where it's like, Jason, mother is talking to you, and that's the only thing that kind of pulls him back, but just barely. It's enough to snap the monster out of the trance, but that thing has been unleashed, and now it's an unstoppable force. And again, talking about a spoiler, her last, and I'll just kind of talk about this. I had mentioned it earlier, didn't want to really get into it, but I will, because I think it's so powerful. At the end, Ursula is talking to Grace about how they can maybe work something out and control Titus,
right,
as the kind of like co-heads of the family.
Right.
Titus overhears that, and he decides that Ursula's time is over, and he gets her in this like headlock, and he ultimately breaks her neck. But she gets out some final words, and it's not, F you or something like that. It's, I love you. And then crack.
Yeah.
And it sucks. I mean, it's a great moment, but it's just like, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because it really gets you to think about like what happened to these people, again, growing up with this life of privilege where their souls have been, consigned to the devil. What do they feel about each other? And you realize that they don't realize what they mean to each other until the very end. And even Titus probably doesn't understand because he's, again, a complete psychopath.
Right. In fact, it's, I have to say, for me, emotionally, at least watching this, and you're right, it's a riot and it's fun and it's not that heavy, but it's heavy enough in the sense that scene has some real weight to it, and you miss her being gone, but maybe just as well that she's now out of it, so she doesn't have to see the further abuses of her brother. But
she's got way more problems to deal with on the other side of that snap.
That's true. It's like, yeah, no, I've got a little contract here. I think you owe me something. Oh, that's right, eternity. How dare you? Yeah, I mean, again, those are kind of moments that I think show there is more of a humane sensibility to it. Not necessarily female, but humane. And it maybe plays as female because it's not so dude and, men who just kill and don't think about it. I mean, that's the other thing that I think has happened with movies, even in horror, where so many people kill and they don't think about it. And yet, ask any cop who's shot somebody and he's prepared for it all of his life and trained for it. They send them to a psychologist because it's a pretty big deal to take somebody's life. And even if it was his life versus yours, it's still the life you've taken and you've snuffed something out. And that's heavy. And this film has a touch of that. At least it gets close to it with some of the things, particularly the hallway fight scene. But I also think it's a great way to show a psychotic because he shouldn't feel the need to have to beat up a woman like that, let alone anybody, let alone a woman who can't really fight back because she's out of his weight class. But it shows that he's just a brute, and he would beat probably a dog too.
Well, and that's the thing is, as we kind of mentioned, there's a contrast from the beginning of the film to, who he is at the end, because he does strike an imposing figure, especially against the much smaller Sarah Michelle Gellar, but he's so easily kind of led around. He gets these moments of rage, like when he's on the hotel PA saying, "Everybody
Yes.
get the F out," that
Yeah.
kind of a thing.
Right.
But you kind of think of him as a comedic lapdog character until he's, kind of comes into his own at the end. And that's the part that's scary. That's the most horror movie element of this, is we're dealing with an abusive psycho. Doesn't the hell stuff, the demon contracts, that again, you take all that stuff out and we're dealing with kind of real world stuff.
Right.
Well, I gotta say, I think let me ask you, is there anything else that we didn't cover? You want to highlight here for Ready or
No,
Not
but I
To?
think it's so rare that we get to talk about a sequel that works and one that maybe betters the original film in its way. That's even rarer. And this is one of those that I think offers a lot. And these filmmakers decided, hey, we're going to do this. And it could just be a cash grab, a dictation by the studio. I don't think so. It's Searchlight, and they're smarter than that. But they said, let's do something really valid here and make it worthy and boost the things that worked well before, but find new things to boost and make it a different movie altogether in a way. And they've done that here, which is nice.
Yeah, well said. And yeah, there's only a couple of like things that I would change about the movie. One of which, and I always said we'd wrap up, is subtitles. There is a really annoying trend in movies lately, and it particularly happens when it comes to Spanish. Is they'll have characters speaking Spanish but not have subtitles. I first noticed this as a
Oh, yeah,
problem during West Side Story from
yeah.
Spielberg. It was a whole thing, and you can take it back to Bad Bunny and this whole like thing on SNL before he did the Super Bowl. Like, I'm going to say the whole thing in Spanish, so you got 3 months to learn it. I'm like, that is the exact opposite of the inclusive message that most of these people from that persuasion espouse, and I just find it really annoying. Like, it sends the message that if you're not going to include me in what you're saying, then what you're saying is not important. And I don't think that's a message that you want out there in the culture.
Also, for that matter, there's always been the Spanish alternative, whether it's calling an operator or customer service or any kind of road sign or sign in a store or whatever else. By the way, one thing I will say to you that is funny, and again, this is a rabbit hole conversation for another time, but there are symbols of Satanism, or what we perceive as Satanism, or the Illuminati, all over the place. You go into various famous buildings from the 20s, and they were helped financed by the Masons, which the Masons are always supposedly part of well, they were part of the the order that started in England to try to make sure the masses didn't overrule the banks and stuff like that. It's the symbol of I think it's like a protractor or whatever.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. You can find those in various buildings, even in Chicago if you go downtown. They're on the placards, and this is sponsored by, and it's that's lovely. Now, I'm not saying that Satanists built great architecture or anything like that, but there's little touches of it, just like the Danvers logo and some of those kind of things to be found that connected to all kinds of our history, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, especially when it comes to like law firms, that's a specific sect known as the Perry Masons.
Yes.
Sorry.
Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun.
All right, on
really
that,
well set up. You walked right into that without a single giveaway. It was very nicely done, sir.
well, thank you. I'm going to give away the rest of this show to the fine folks out there, because we've been talking for an hour. It's been a lovely conversation. I hope that no one is watching this who hasn't seen Ready or Not To, because we've spoiled a bunch of stuff. But I will say it is one of those really fun movies. See it, and I didn't see it at packed theater. Jeff, you saw it in a theater. I watched it at home because I wasn't able to make it out. But it was one of those things where I was jealous of people who are going to see this opening weekend in a movie theater, because it is one of those laugh out loud, fun kind of party vibe movies that also has something going on deeper on another level, which I think is nice and rare. So yeah, go see it, have a blast. And I don't need to see a third one. I hope this is it for Ready or Not, but depending on how this one does, maybe they'll try something else. But again, after the first movie, I was like, I'm done with this. But then the sequel kind of blew me away.
If you're going to do a sequel for this one, have the two sisters come back, but they have to fight something else that isn't done as a game, that isn't the same kind of survive to midnight or to the morning and fight at midnight kind of thing. I don't know what that is, but that might be a way to go. Again, keeping it different, even though you're using similar elements.
I say just give the same creative team another movie with Samara Weaving in the genre,
Exactly. Do something better.
and go nuts.
Do
Yeah.
something different. Yes, I'm with you, my friend.
Yeah. Rock, paper, scissors. There you go. That'll be yeah.
There you go.
All right. Well, Jeff York, again, of the Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists. Thank you very much, sir. It's always a pleasure. Folks out there, if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications, all that good stuff. If you've seen the movie, which again, I hope you have, please leave a note in the comments. What did you think? Are we way off base? Of course not. But, you know, if you have alternate ideas or theories, opinions, we'd love to hear them. But yeah, thank you very much again. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much and take care. Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.